This media is brought to you by Polyscope.
In the realm of tomorrow, where techniques mind, we ponder, we dream.
Thank you so much for coming on the show. It's great to finally meet you because this is how we meet each other nowadays over Zoom. So why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and your organization and what you're passionate about?
So hi, I'm Aman. I'm an AI researcher at Cisco. I graduated from Carnegie Mellon, specializing in privacy engineering. So a lot of my research is to do with artificial intelligence and the privacy therein. So a lot of these models are aggregated with a bunch of data from the web, and my goal is to audit if they leak privacy or if there are techniques which can prevent such leakages from happening. So yeah,
So LLMs are literally giant caches, giant databases, right?
yeah,
Of
yeah.
language. So how are they structured? I get can you like the thing I don't really understand is like I almost think that LLMs or generative AI is almost like a super sophisticated autocorrect where it's trying to figure out what next word to put in place. I mean, I'm assuming it's more sophisticated than that.
Yeah, there's some amazing works out there about reasoning, which discuss that. Next word prediction is an amazing concept that we can do pull it off using machines. So large language models, in a sense, take the entire web, understand like how our human language works. And for example, let's take a detective novel. I'm not sure whom I'm quoting this from, but say you run through an entire mystery of different situations and cases that happen, maybe different clues that show up in the book. And then at the end of it, you have a prompt along the lines of, and the murderer was, and the LLM generates the person's name, which would mean that the LLM is able to understand, interpret, and reason out these concepts, these clues to figure out that, hey, it is basically this person who is committing these crimes. And so it's an interesting thought that maybe next word prediction is a way of reasoning. And I think LLMs do try to like encapsulate it, but I think like our world itself is like a next state prediction kind of a situation where the universe is evolving continuously, and if we can move beyond language to just predicting physics, it would be like the next step in, I guess, AI evolution.
Oh, I can't imagine when that happens. That'll be crazy. But the LLMs currently today, they
Yeah.
contain all of this data. Where does this data come from?
A lot of the data is from the internet, from different archives of the internet, even like websites dating back to 2000s even. And a lot of it is like, say, Wikipedia is a great source, but a lot of it is from like corpuses which were scraped from the internet, like Books 3 dataset, which is a lot of copyrighted and non-copyrighted books, which
Right.
have just been downloaded from the web. A collection of websites like Reddit, Twitter, Medium articles. So it's like a huge variety of information which is just scraped, downloaded, and then you basically try and train a machine learning model which predicts the next word
hmm
over these different documents. Yeah.
So the thing is that what you're saying to me is that it's kind of like what's ever out there on the public web has been
Yeah.
scraped and been fed into this LLM. But the problem is that all of that stuff is copyrighted, right? I mean, I wrote my blog post is up there, my video is up there, my photos are up there. All of these things are up there, but they're not owned by the company that's harvesting them. So how does it get around that issue, or can it?
That's a great question. I don't know if it can yet. There are ongoing lawsuits which are working on just copyrighted data and LLMs. And there are organizations which are fighting to make sure that LLMs basically can train on copyrighted data. Personally, since I work in privacy, I don't think that's a good idea. People own their data and they should have claim over it. So I think that's like the essence of owning your information. That's the essence of privacy.
Right.
There's been some amazing cases where, like, local newspapers with their specific style of writing has been emulated in these large language models, um, where they're able to write exactly like these articles or even quote from them. One of the research areas where I worked in personally was like word to word, exactly quotable replications of New York Times articles and um, Washington Post articles. So these LLMs definitely do enter copyrighted like websites, take that data and have learned or memorized them. So that does happen. And yeah, I don't think there's any way to protect yourself at this point, at least, against it.
Well, I mean, some of these are they're behind firewalls and things like that, but there's always ways of getting around it, right, to get to the data.
Yeah.
But it's like on the one hand, you want to protect your data, but on the other hand, you also want it to be able to enrich the AI. So, I mean, is there a solution that works for both parties so that I can get remuneration for my copyrighted data, but at the same time, it can be used in the LLMs?
I mean, currently, a lot of the stuff that's happening is legal, where there are newspapers, say in Pittsburgh, where I live right now, there are local newspapers which have hundreds of years of textual content, which are selling previous copies of the newspapers to OpenAI and
Hmm.
to Anthropic. So it's like really cool that there are like legal ways to buy this kind of information. But what happens with the data which has already been scraped and then used for all the analysis? Like that data has already been taken, and in those cases, I think there has been an opportunity to use stuff which we call privacy preserving machine learning. So you have concepts like differential privacy, which is in a sense adding a little bit of noise into the data to prevent your exact data from being read or like from being like aligned with the exposed model. So, like for example, you wrote an article in a particular way, we would basically manipulate it slightly so that it exactly doesn't learn your way of writing, your style of writing. That doesn't discuss the remuneration part, whether you get paid for your copyright data.
Right.
But in that case, there's like stuff going on around attribution forming and how you can attribute to which articles from the training set a model has been, model is producing output on. So that exists.
Well, I mean, that works great for organizations that create content. So like newspapers and other content creating organizations, right? But a lot of what we watch out there or read out there is actually created by individuals on social media, right? It goes on social
Right.
media, it goes on YouTube, goes on. So, and the thing is that who gets the remuneration from that? I mean, do we pay YouTube for using their videos to train a model, or do we pay the individual who created the video that's posted on YouTube? And it seems like neither is being paid right now.
Yeah, I don't think either of them are being paid right now. And like YouTube's a really interesting concept because there's so much information at this point on YouTube. You can develop entire models on it,
Oh
like
yeah,
just on YouTube data.
absolutely.
Yeah, and then I think there should be payment to both to I mean ideally it should be paid to the user who is creating that data primarily to them. YouTube can make a hosting surcharge, I guess, because since they're hosting the platform, but it would make more sense if it's the individual who's getting paid because that's how copyrighted IPs work. Like you have, I created that data, I own it, and depending on the license I put forth on my video, I should be basically paid based on that.
Right.
So I definitely think it should be individual based. Yeah.
Right. Well, I mean, and the thing is, it's kind of like the copyright law hasn't really kept up with where we're at, right? Because copyright law was originally, as soon as I wrote something down, it's
Yeah.
copywritten. I mean, I can go register it if I want, but it's copywritten. So really, when I go to X and do a post on X, that is something I've copywritten, but it's sitting on their servers and somebody else can harvest it. And it's not
Yeah.
costing, they're not paying me, they're not paying X, they're just taking it and going, we need this for our model. Which on the other
Yeah.
hand, on one hand, yes, I would gladly give up some of my stuff for my model, but I also want remuneration at the same time because, that list of words that I put together might have taken me a lot of effort to come up with.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And at this point, all these social medias have these weird privacy policies. Like LinkedIn changed their privacy policy recently about a lot of the user information being posted there can be used for training their AI models. Same goes with X. Like a lot of people are moving social media platforms just because of the privacy policy changes and Gen AI training usage now written into their policies. Actually, YouTube also stands there because YouTube doesn't directly say anything specific about Gen AI. So it's really interesting because Google has or at least maybe trying to train models, or Google has given access of YouTube to their models. So that definitely exists. So it's like a really interesting phase where these companies are changing privacy policies just to accommodate their models. Zoom has done it too. Zoom, I think, backpedaled them. So it was pretty cool. Uh,
So are you familiar with all the different models that are out there and their
yeah,
capabilities?
yeah,
Which one's the best? Like, I mean, it's like there's so many, I mean, there's like four or five mainstream models that kind of do a little bit of everything. But
yeah.
how do you know which one is the best? How do you know which one to pay for? How do you know which one is is doing the best job, I guess you could say.
Yeah, I think, I mean, best job definitely depends on something you would come up with, like your way of evaluating these models. For me, a lot of it is about the way in which they propose ideas or the way they help me articulate my ideas. So, like for me, Claude is really helpful because a lot of the way in which it writes is very human in nature compared to ChatGPT at least.
Hmm.
So it's pretty well thought of the way it writes, and I think like I really like Claude Sonnet 3.5 model, but there are other models out there like there's ChatGPT, there's O1, and now most recently O3, which are pretty good at reasoning, and I think those models are great for coding practices or like just a bunch of reasoning problem statements. They do work really well. So yeah, I think it depends on the use case, but for me, it's Claude Sonnet 3.5. So.
What about Perplexity? What do you think of them?
Perplexity is great too. I mean, they have a lot of work done in just architecting search through LLMs, which I think is the next uh, cool thing that's going to happen with more and more of these LLM companies getting into search. Perplexity is great the way it's able to search site sources. There have been times where it like misquoted things, but I think that's a problem of the LLM hallucination, and I think that's going to happen with LLMs. But it is pretty rigorous in terms of not making mistakes every single time, which sometimes ChatGPT makes. So
Oh yeah,
it's
ChatGPT is like the king of making mistakes.
yeah,
I think. But they're the oldest and the longest. You think they'd be the most evolved. You think they'd be the
yeah,
best at this point, but it just seems that these other models are leapfrogging him it
yeah. I
somehow.
think every week some new model comes. It just breaks a bunch of stuff. So I think a bunch of evaluation metrics. So I definitely
Yeah.
think that yeah, OpenAI either has to step up its release schedule or it's like something they have to do.
So, I mean, there's so much going on in that market right now. I mean, do you think there's going to be a shakeout at some point because you've got, all these models and you've got all these chatbots and you've got all these video generators and you've got all these image generators and you've got it's like there's so many of these tools and there seems to be more tools coming out every single day. Is there going to be a point where things are going to shake out, or are we just going to continue having all these tools coming out on a
I
regular
mean,
basis?
yeah, I think I agree. There's like a bunch of stuff happening every single week. From an academic perspective, like from a research perspective, there's just papers coming out, new papers, new ideas, new ways of architecting these models coming out every single week. There's a bunch to learn, there's a bunch to explore. And I don't see a saturation point. Like looking at things from archive, there's like an exponential increase in the number of papers related to LLMs. So there definitely are more works being done and more researchers getting involved. The number of researchers themselves involved in this space is increasing. I mean, I was at Carnegie Mellon, a bunch of my professors, a bunch of the students there, irrespective of whether we were from the privacy engineering program doing privacy work, a lot of our work incorporated LLMs, how they understood privacy, or whether they even uh, like had any private information within them. So,
Right.
uh, yeah,
They
I
didn't
don't
even
think it's
care. More information, the
yeah,
better, right?
yeah, I mean, we had a bunch of work where we were able to leak from synthetic data, which is basically you have natural human data, but you create artificial data using
Yeah.
maybe large language models from them. And then these synthetic data sets had privately sensitive information within them, which were public figures and public, like people in the real world. So it was really cool that, you know, privacy is like a subset of is like a thing they think about at the end where just these companies don't really think about it that carefully. So
Well, see, that's the thing with privacy that's always struck me as interesting is I did a project for the World Economic Forum a long time ago, like about 20 years ago. And actually, no, maybe about 10 years ago, 15 years ago. And do you remember there was a time when Facebook had these huge data breaches and everybody was
yeah,
really concerned about privacy, right? And we thought, okay, some people are going to start getting concerned about privacy. So we need to figure out some way for people to be able to control where their data goes on the internet. Maybe there's a personal data store or whatever. And then about 6 months later, it all blew over and nobody cared about it anymore. So,
yeah.
I mean, I guess, are we ever going to get to a point where people are going to really care about their private data, or they've all pretty much given up and said, you know what, I get too much utility by giving it away anyway, so I'm just going to keep giving it away.
I mean, I agree with that sentiment. Like, people not from my program, and I talk to them that, hey, Google has your data or Facebook has your data, and they're like, yeah, but I use that search, it improves my experience. I get better ads. Sometimes I click on those ads, it's useful to me. And I mean, the notion is shared between a lot of people. A lot of people in the like Gen Alpha generation, Gen Z generation are just giving up. Like they already have everything known to me. They
Yeah,
probably
they posted
profile me
on it
better.
publicly,
Yeah,
private stuff publicly anyway.
yeah. So it's it's just it's privacy as a concept is definitely being thought of less, but I do not think it will disappear because there are definitely ramifications of giving away private data, which are beyond just which can negatively harm beyond just utility. I mean, medical data, healthcare has a lot of sensitive information which, if gone out, could screw with your insurance, could screw with just the kind of treatments you get. There could be discrimination. 23andMe has been a really interesting issue with them going bankrupt and then now them having to sell off a bunch of people's DNA data to to the next investor. So
Right,
I think just the idea of like your genome being just sold away and then them being able to do a bunch of different profiling, like, hey, you might be 4 times likely to get diabetes, and potentially selling that kind of data off is just scary to me. Like
right.
beyond just Google has all my data, so like it's
Yeah.
just
Well, that's
beyond
the
that.
thing. It sounds like what you're saying is that the individual people whose data it is don't really care that much. It's the corporations that are holding their data that are
Yeah,
really in concern because if they're the ones who have a data breach or whatever, they're the ones who are going to get in trouble, right?
yeah,
Not the
yeah,
individuals. I mean, individuals will lose their data and they'll change their password or whatever they'll do. But so that subset of data is okay, but you know, it's really the corporations that are really more concerned with the
yeah.
private data getting out there.
Yeah, I think it's all to do with regulations, HIPAA, and the likes, GDPR, HIPAA, CCPA. So
Yeah, and
I
there's
think
like
they,
terribly high fines for data
yes,
breaches and things like that, right? I mean, they're really punitive.
yep. Most recently, I think Italy, for the first time, has fined uh, like OpenAI for 1.5 million. Sorry, I think I'm maybe making a mistake, but for a significant amount for their AI models, like using private information from Italy. So that
Right.
is that is really cool. Yeah.
Right.
So it
So
is
it
organizational.
so it's really the threat of government fining them that's the
Yeah.
biggest threat for these organizations, right? I mean, if they didn't have these kind of fines, I mean, individuals aren't going to sort of rise up and say, "Hey, you let my data out." It's more the governments that they're concerned about.
Yep. I mean, at this point, definitely. Unless there are privacy policies which put power into our hands, which give us class action lawsuits, like the ability to do those kinds of acts just based on privacy breaches. Until then, I think it's government regulations which are keeping these organizations in
Right.
check.
So, I mean, do you think there'll ever be a point where people will actually care about privacy, like individual human beings, or
I mean, I think there is definitely a fear of having to lose your data, which exists in everyone. It's just that it's being so muddled, like it's slowly being chipped away since like we were young. It's just
mm,
your data is on Google, you're able to connect to people through Facebook. It's being chipped away. But that fear of privacy, I think, exists in people. It's just the way you tap into it, or like the way you explain it to them. Like, hey, uh, you're going to be like maybe if it's healthcare data, it's easier to like kind of explain to people what threats might occur just because of their information being leaked. You'll probably be paying a higher amount of penalty just or like maybe your insurance premium is just really high by default because like your parents had medical history was leaked and then they think that you're more likely to just have certain rare diseases and then
Right. So when it actually affects them materially, that's when
yeah.
they go, okay, now I'm concerned about my privacy.
Yeah, I definitely think that. Yeah.
So where do you think we're going with this? I mean, do you think things are going to get better or worse as
I
time goes
think,
on?
yeah, I think AI is making things worse from a technical perspective because, um, I mean, they are getting so much information. These models do know enough about us as individuals. Like some people, even if you're a little bit obscurely famous, it's like, say you have uh, you've just a small following. Even then, these models can pick up your information, remember them, and then later on in the future say, you want to forget this kind of stuff, or you want to remove it from the internet, you want to delete all your accounts and stuff. These models are going to remember your information. And there, at least till now, there is no way to remove information from machine learning models once they have been trained, from large language models once they have been trained. So that's a really scary thing that these become like archived logs of you and from a technical perspective, deletion of data, the idea of forgetting yourself from the internet, those things will definitely become more difficult. From public's notion that whether they are interested in privacy, I think people are slowly understanding the value of privacy. At least uh, there is a little bit of movement to go offline in certain cases, not discuss certain things. But the amount of like dopamine hits that social media gives us, I think a
Oh
lot
yeah.
of the generations already on every single
Yeah.
platform, and yeah, I think it's gonna
So,
take time.
so you mentioned synthetic data earlier, and I thought that was really interesting because I did some project work in synthetic data as well, and I read somewhere that they're saying that synthetic data is great, but it can't doesn't work really well when you're trying to use it to train AI models. Is that true?
I mean, it definitely. So there's an idea in synthetic data that say you take an original data set which was already like biased in certain way. Like for
Right.
example, if it's credit loan approval by historical like historically women have been less likely to be given loans, which means the data itself will be underrepresenting women, the original data set. Now, when you extract synthetic data out of it, a lot of the information, even if you try to balance men and women in that data set, will be based on the women who were a very small portion of the original data set. And so the model will not be able to understand how to represent them correctly,
So the
which means
synthetic
even
data
if,
is going to be just as biased as the original data.
yeah, yeah, or it's sometimes even worse because what happens is if there is an outlier in that small subset of minority groups, then it will propagate that even more, like even higher. And what happens is there at some point it leads to just stereotyping continuously, like a bias propagation. The more synthetic data you generate, the worse the model is going to get. And this happens in general with the quality of content as well. So, like if you had a very diverse group in the beginning, the model will slowly start generalizing towards a very particular set of people
Hmm.
who who are more unique in that original data set. And this is
Interesting.
called model collapse. So like quality basically reduces the more you generate synthetic data. And yeah,
So
that's really
so it's
cool.
kind of a catch-22. You can't generate if you generate synthetic data and it gets to that point, then that actually makes the model worse, right?
Yeah,
It
yeah,
eventually fall
yeah.
apart. So you kind of have to use synthetic data, but you can't use synthetic data. So you have to just figure out some way to use the real data.
Yeah, and that's where I think privacy tech comes into picture, where like you have differential privacy, federated learning, these different algorithmic inventions which work with private data, ensuring that AI can learn on these private information without exposing them, basically.
So here's a question for you. How familiar are you with the whole Apple Intelligence thing? Because Apple Intelligence is supposedly you've got it's more private than typical LLMs. Are you familiar with how that's supposed to operate in relation to
I
everything
mean,
else?
I've just gone over news articles, not really gone through any documentation. They have not released too much information other than the fact that they use secure computation where like your information stays cryptographically or encrypted so that no one else can, even if they get access to like different aspects of their servers or their models, they will not be able to break it. A lot of the information is processed locally even, so it doesn't leave your device. But like LLMs obviously has to leave your device. But where the compute happens is basically secure encrypted space. So what information comes in is encrypted, what information goes out is encrypted. Uh, and I mean, that's how they are assuming that, things will be private. But there have been cases where even clean rooms and other things have been broken just because of some other thing which has been insecure. I mean, the weakest link, your security is as strong as the weakest link that you have.
Yeah,
And I think something or the other thing might be missed out, which will end up leaking a lot of information. So yeah.
that's usually the case. It's always the case. So it's time to think like a futurist. It's the year 2035, 10 years from now. Where do you think we're going to be in this in all this? Will privacy be more important, less important? Are we going to have AGI at the time where and it's going to handle all that for us? Where will we be?
I mean, 2035, it's a really long time, but I do think that a lot of the internet will be different from now. There will be more privacy, I believe, or I personally hope to see that, where a bunch of information online is being attributed correctly. There are remunerations for copyrighted material. AI is able to explain these sources properly, or like appropriately tag them at least that, hey, I use these bunch of resources from even my training set. Uh, for generating this response, and a cut of all that stuff is going to the right copyright owners. There's definitely going to be a weird stage in the internet where a bunch of information is going to be LLM generated rather than human generated. And I think the whole idea behind model collapse and synthetic data is going to start affecting these LLMs at that point, where
Mm.
these LLMs start collapsing within themselves from the data that they have outputted and then learning again on it. So those things might happen. Um, Privacy, I hope, will be something that individuals are more like priority ridden about, where people are thinking more about their private information, and hopefully there are regulations again which help these people like with that kind of information, copyright and privacy. So
Yeah, I'm
yeah.
hoping we're going to get to a point where there's actually you have your own personal AI that works for you, and it's the thing that controls all of your personal data. So when other AIs ask for data, it'll be the sort of like the gatekeeper. So instead of human beings sitting there, because I remember the models we were trying to do is like you would go to Facebook and it would say, okay, what's Facebook allowed to see? Blah 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 blah. What's Amazon allowed to see? Blah 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 blah. And it was
Right,
really painful. I mean, regular
right.
person would not want to do that. But if you had an
Yeah.
AI managing all that, it could even make those decisions for you and release data to certain other AI that it needed to based on what you were asking for. But at the same time, it could keep everything else private. So do you see something like that happening in sometime in the next 10 years?
I definitely think something like that is already happening. There's a bunch of entrepreneurship cells in CMU. A bunch of them are working, at least one of them is working on a consent management AI system where
Hmm.
when you go to a different website, it looks at the cookies these websites are using and granularly selects the ones you might be okay with. And from website to website, the context changes. If you say at some point say that, hey, I do not want Amazon or this website to have this information, even if you just chat it out, this agent records it, this Chrome extension records it and is able to select the right options at that point. So I definitely think something like that would exist. And I do believe personalized agents will be a thing which will happen pretty soon. I do think that'll happen. Yeah.
Sorry, I lost my headphones for my headphones died for some reason. So can you hear me okay still?
Yeah, I can hear you. Okay.
Okay. I completely missed everything that you were saying.
Oh,
I'm
okay.
sure it was extremely interesting. Could you repeat some of it?
Yeah, I mean, I just said I definitely think personalized agents will exist. There's like an entrepreneurship self at CMU, where one startup is working on automated consent management for cookies on different websites. So you tell it like, hey, I do not want Amazon taking this kind of data, and then it'll automatically, when you go to Amazon, it changes your cookies to deselect that kind of information from being shared.
Oh, I love that.
So
Well, where is that located? I mean, what's the name of that app or AI?
oh, it's still a work in progress. There are people building it, so hopefully that launches sometime next year, maybe towards the summer. But yeah.
Cool. Well, this has been great. Thank you so much. If somebody wants to get in touch with you, what's the best way?
I mean, I have my LinkedIn. You can look me up at Aman Priyanshu, or you can look me up at my website, which is amanpriyanshu.github.io. So
Very cool. I'll put all those links in the show notes and we'll go from there. Thank you so much. Been great.
thank you.
Talk to you later. Bye.
Bye.
Pixels and philosophies merge and mold, a future untold, unseen.